Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. When I was in college in the early 2010s, I met Alex, then M23, through mutual friends. He had already graduated and was planning to move across the country for grad school. I had already made plans to move with friends only a 2-hour drive away from where he was moving. We had so much in common, fell in love, and it really seemed like fate, both planning to move 3,000 miles and landing so close together. He had 2 sisters and a younger brother who were all awesome people, and I became instant friends with them as well. Because he was in school and I was working, I would usually go to him to hang out on weekends. He was renting a house with 2 roommates, also in his program. We were young, so money was tight, but we had fun, went for ramen dates, and spent a lot of time at his house where he was breeding and selling exotic reptiles. Alex was a herpetology PhD student, so being around reptiles was normal, and I loved it. I met and became friends with his advisor's wife, Sarah F., mid-50s, who worked in administration at the university. She's a lovely woman, and I would often have lunch with her when I went over on weekends. Alex was a teaching assistant, TA, and I met other people in the program and made friends with them faster than he did. After about 2 years of dating, I was at the house one day, lying in bed together, in a state of some undress, and he said out of the blue, "I'm concerned you've been gaining weight, and it's making it harder for me to be attracted to you." No concern about my health, it was all about him finding me unattractive. I sat up and said, "Well, then maybe you should make sure there's better food for me to eat than instant noodles and energy drinks when I come up on weekends." Even at 23, I didn't take that kind of BS. I had gained maybe 10 pounds since meeting him 2 years earlier and still wore the same size clothes, about a US size 6 to 8. I wasn't going to engage in a fight about it, after all. It was his problem, not mine. So I asked him calmly, "So what's your solution to this?" He stared at me blankly and said, "Well, I guess that you should try to lose weight." I replied, "Nah, I'm not gonna do that, so what are you gonna do about it?" He said, "Well, I guess nothing. I wanted to let you know how I feel." I said, "Cool, thank you." Put my clothes back on, went to sleep, and drove home the next day as usual. We kept dating, and about 3 months later he called me and said he wanted to break up after close to 3 years. The reason, and I quote, "You don't know enough about herpetology." He felt like he couldn't have a conversation with me about his work where he didn't have to use common names for reptiles instead of scientific ones. I said, "Well, that's bullcrap. What's the real reason?" He insisted it was the real reason. He came to see me a month later to return something of mine, and I confronted him, demanding the truth. He finally admitted he had been seeing one of his undergrad students, let's call her Emma, a 19-year-old. He was then 26, and her teacher. I screamed at him to leave. My roommate threatened to throw him off our second-floor balcony if he didn't go, and he left. It hit me all at once after he walked out, and I went from rage to stunned laughter. I'd met Emma a few times, and at one point she was at his house for a BBQ and spilled something all over her pants. Alex asked me if I could loan her some leggings. I couldn't because I was a size 8 and she was a size 18. Nothing wrong with that, at all, but the point is, I realized he made those comments about my weight to try and get me to break up with him because he was a coward. He clearly liked a bigger gal. I texted his roommates to let them know we'd broken up and that they were always lovely to me and thanked them for being friends. They both admitted they knew about Emma and were the ones to demand that Alex tell me or they would. That's when he broke up with me with the lame, "You don't understand herpetology" excuse. One of his roommates, a super nice, super cute guy named Ryan, offered to help me get a few things still at their house that he had collected for me from around the house. He suggested I come up for the weekend, we go out and drink and have a good time. All the things Alex didn't want to waste money on, and I said sure. So I went up, and Ryan let me into the house while Alex was gone. I took photos of all of his reptiles because, while I might not be a PhD student, I paid attention, and I knew he had an endangered species in his care. He wasn't breeding it, it was an unreleasable animal he had taken in from a rescue organization. There was paperwork he had to submit with a $50 fee, and he refused to do it, saying he didn't want the government in his business. I took photos of that animal, all his breeding conditions, and a photo of a reptile not allowed in the state, which was in a terrarium right next to a window and visible from outside. I then went out for a night on the town with Ryan. We stumbled in early, around midnight, so Alex and Emma, who were watching TV, would see me in a short dress, drunk, and Ryan practically carrying me. I spent the night in Ryan's room. He was a total gentleman, but made sure to leave the room and parade past them in his boxers a few times, and we giggled and moaned loudly so they could hear us. When I went to leave the next morning, Alex said, "You don't have to act like a slut in front of me," as I ate a croissant slowly in my rumpled dress with messy hair, while Ryan beamed at me and then planted a kiss on my head. Emma looked ashamed, not quite knowing where to look, and I said, "Have fun with my leftovers," and walked out. I wanted to think the petty, loud hookup and a few juvenile insults was my revenge. It was not. The next day, I called the State Office of Fish and Wildlife. I reported the reptiles in the house, the potential overcrowding of breeding animals, and the 2 animals he shouldn't legally have at all in the state, and asked them how to make a report. Turns out Alex wasn't well liked by his peers in his program or by his roommates, but I was. Ryan had suggested that he and their other roommate could submit complaints to the university that a TA was sleeping with one of his students and showing her favoritism. The night we were out at the bars, we made sure to tell the story to anyone they knew. They made sure all the women in his classes knew he was sleeping with Emma. It wasn't a large program, so people knew fast he had cheated and was now dating his student. Ryan and the other roommate made sure people knew they had put in complaints, sick of Alex's entitled BS. With my full statement made and photos sent to the state wildlife officials, I called my friend Sarah, Alex's advisor's wife. She knew about the breakup and lame reason, and I let her know he admitted he was sleeping with a student. I'd been texting with him and he admitted to it in writing, so I sent screenshots to Sarah. To say she was not happy about that was an understatement. She said she'd make sure it would be investigated and told her husband, Alex's direct advisor, while I was on the phone with her. Speaking of investigations, a few weeks later, Ryan called me, giddy, to say state fish and wildlife officials were there, confiscating animals. He told them he would be happy to tell them whatever they needed to know. Emma was there when it happened and told the officials, as far as she knew, all the animals belonged to her boyfriend Alex, and that they were all legal. That put Ryan and the other roommate in the clear. One animal was kept in the backyard, so it was implied to Alex that a neighbor reported it. While they were there to investigate, they knew to look in the back window to see the far more problematic, illegal to have in the state under nearly any circumstances animal. Since Ryan was on the lease, he was able to let them in to investigate the house. The animals were all in communal areas, and the officers stayed there for a few hours and returned with a warrant to take all the animals and enter Alex's room to investigate. Ryan and the other roommate let them into their rooms with no issues and were quickly cleared. Emma apparently couldn't get a hold of Alex and eventually drove to the university to find him. It was a good day. The only animals they left were some goldfish in a tank. Now, PhD students need grant money to do research, and a large part of animal studies funding comes from the federal government. Alex had just gotten an NSF grant right around when he broke up with me, so I called the NSF and asked how I would report that a person with a federal grant was being investigated for illegally harboring endangered animals. Long story short, he lost his NSF grant and had to make restitution on what had already been used, close to $50,000. He would never be able to get another federal grant. He avoided jail time on the state charges since all the animals were in good health, but lost all his breeding reptiles, worth thousands of dollars, since they were collected for safekeeping during the investigation when the 2 illegal animals were taken. In the end, he owed a $25,000 fine, and the 2 animals went to a nearby nature center. For years, I would stop by if I was in the area to visit them. The university revoked his scholarship and fired him from teaching for having an inappropriate relationship with a student. He somehow escaped being expelled, but it always shocked me that he never tried to hide the relationship with Emma, and was so stupidly self-assured he didn't even wait the 4 weeks until she would have been done with his class to start publicly dating her. By the university rules, he would have been in the clear to date her, not being her teacher anymore, and she would just have to avoid any classes he was a TA in. It never fails to make me laugh. After a few months, I texted his sisters and told them I missed them because Alex broke up with me after trying to call me fat and cheating on me, and I felt weird contacting them. The girls told me he told the family I broke up with him because of the distance. I forwarded them screenshots of texts that Alex wrote after the breakup, talking about how he fell for Emma and he was sorry about it, but it was true. I couldn't keep up with him academically, and it made him attracted to Emma. Alex managed to convince his dad to pay for one more year of school so he could get a master's instead of a PhD, and while I stayed in contact with his sisters and brother via text and then social media, I largely let it all go. I got even, made some friends, Sarah became like an auntie to me, and I went on with life. I went on to get a master's degree myself, and my specialty, helping scientists and doctors communicate their work to lay people, us dummies who can't remember all the scientific names. I swear it happened by accident, not design, but I love it, and I work with everyone from small-town doctors and nurses to pharmaceutical companies to museums to state and federal governments to film and TV producers. I travel a lot and speak and get to learn a lot of cool things about our planet and how things work. I knew through his siblings that Alex and Emma got married and had 2 kids. Emma dropped out of the sciences and became an accountant. Alex went back to breeding reptiles. Every once in a while, his sisters or brother would tell me something over lunch or via text, but we had our own relationship that exists outside of him. Apparently, when I sent a wedding gift for one of his sisters, he loudly complained at a co-ed bridal shower that all of his siblings were still my friends and didn't make an effort to embrace his now wife, Emma. Apparently, the sister just laughed and said, "I don't make it a habit to be friends with homewreckers." This is how Alex's parents found out how their relationship started and ours ended 5 years after we broke up. Alex never found out I was behind reporting him to the state, and in the end, I didn't lie about a single thing, except maybe exaggerating a drunken makeout session with Ryan, who is now a successful and tenured professor with a lovely wife and daughters. Fast forward about 10 years to a few weeks ago. I was at a university giving a lecture to a room of 250 undergrad and grad students. In the end, I was mingling with the students afterward, and I hear a voice say, "Hey, OP, long time no see," and I realize it's Alex, and I didn't change the expression on my face at all. I was completely shocked, and my instinct was to play dumb. So I said, "I'm sorry, help me out. Have we met at another workshop or lecture?" He looked incredulous and said, "It's me, Alex." And I said, "I can't place you, but I would love to figure it out." Finally, I gasped and said, "Oh my goodness, Alex. I guess I blocked you out," and said, "Well, lovely to see you," and moved on quickly when he tried to reach out and hug me. I was happy to leave it there with the satisfaction of him seeing me as a guest lecturer in a science department of a major university when he was just in the audience. The department chair and faculty who had invited me to speak took me out to dinner, and while there, one of them said, "So you know Alex?" I said I did from over 10 years ago, being vague about how. She went on to tell me he had been there for an interview for a teaching position and had spent a few days there observing, and they were likely going to hire him. I couldn't control it. I scoffed. When they all looked at me, I said, "I'm sorry, I'm just shocked he's teaching after what happened at University X." They said, "What happened?" And I said, "He was sleeping with a 19-year-old student when he was 26, and he had to leave the program without a PhD because he couldn't afford to stay after losing his scholarship." The 3 people I was with all looked at each other like they knew they had a problem and said, "Wow, we'll have to look into that," and changed the subject. My old friend Sarah, retired a year or 2 now but still friendly with her old colleagues, called me this weekend to say a friend at the university let her know someone had called doing a background check about Alex, and they pulled his file, which included being fired, leaving the program with a lower degree, and the complaint letters from over 10 years ago about his conduct. Sarah's name had been on it with her husband listed as the faculty advisor, so she thought she'd like to know. As a bonus, it had a copy of his arrest record for the illegal animals. I guess his dad had paid for a decent lawyer to get the record expunged after the charges were reduced and he paid the fines, so it doesn't show up on a standard background check. I don't think he's going to get that job, so I will return to my life. Content that the universe comes through sometimes, especially if you give it a little nudge now and then. The best revenge is when you don't have to do anything wrong. You just have to help direct knowledge to the right places. If there's anything I can impart to any young women and men reading this, as I shimmy happily into my now size 10 pants, it's that if someone who is supposed to love you complains about your weight or looks, that is their problem to fix mentally, not yours. And maybe it's time to check out what they're doing behind your back or simply move on. Remember though, it is their flaw, not yours. If Alex hadn't been a coward and tried to make me break up with him and just ended things with me in a mature way, I might not have found out about Emma and turned his own wickedness back on himself. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd have to deal with homeowner association drama on my farm. Yeah, you heard that right, my farm. I've lived here for over 20 years, way before any of these fancy subdivisions started popping up nearby. This land's been in my family for generations. We grow corn, soybeans, and raise some livestock. Nothing huge, but it's honest work, and I'm proud of it. About 5 years ago, they started building this ritzy neighborhood right next to my property line. All these big houses with manicured lawns, quite a contrast to my weathered barn and fields. I didn't mind at first, live and let live, right? But then the homeowner association formed, and that's when the trouble started. It began with little things. Complaints about my tractor noise early in the mornings, whining about the smell when I fertilized the fields. I tried to be a good neighbor, adjusted my schedule a bit, but come on, it's a working farm. What did they expect? The real problem started with Karen. She moved in about a year ago and immediately appointed herself Queen Bee of the Homeowner Association. Always strutting around in her fancy workout clothes, talking on her phone too loud about spin classes and juice cleanses. She took one look at my place and decided it was bringing down property values. I first met her when she marched up to my door one Saturday morning. I was just heading out to the barn. "Excuse me," she said, nose wrinkled like she smelled something bad. "Are you the owner of this property?" I nodded, trying to be polite. "Yes, ma'am. I'm John. Been here over 20 years now." She thrust a stack of papers at me. "Well, I'm Karen, president of the Sunny Meadows Homeowner Association. We've had some complaints about the state of your land. I'm here to give you a copy of our bylaws and let you know about several violations." I just stared at her for a second, then burst out laughing. "Ma'am, I hate to break it to you, but I'm not part of your homeowner association. Never signed up, never will." Her face went red. "That's impossible. All properties in this area are required to join. Not mine," I said firmly. "My farm was here long before your neighborhood. You have no jurisdiction over me or my land." She spluttered for a bit, then stormed off, saying she'd be back. I figured that was the end of it. But Karen wasn't one to give up easily. Over the next few months, she tried everything to force me to join the homeowner association. She sent threatening letters, had her lawyer contact me. He backed off real quick when I showed him my property documents, and even tried to sweet-talk me by inviting me to homeowner association barbecues. I stood my ground. "Not interested," I kept saying. "Please leave me alone." Things came to a head over my farm sign. See, I have this big old wooden sign at the end of my driveway. It's been there for decades, hand-painted by my granddad. It says Miller Family Farm, ested 1,932 inches, with a little picture of a tractor. Nothing fancy, but it means a lot to me. One morning, I went out to check the mail and the sign was gone. Just an empty space where it used to stand. I was furious. I had a pretty good idea who was behind this. I marched over to Karen's house and rang the doorbell. She answered in her bathrobe, all innocent-like. "Can I help you?" she asked sweetly. "Where's my sign?" I demanded. She blinked. "I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about." "My farm sign. It's been stolen, and I think you know something about it." Karen's face hardened. "Oh, that eyesore? I had it removed. It violated our sign ordinances and was an embarrassment to the neighborhood. I couldn't believe what I was hearing." "You had no right to do that. That sign is on my property, which is not part of your homeowner association." "All residents must comply with homeowner association rules," she said stubbornly. "For the last time, I am not a resident of your homeowner association." I was shouting now, not caring who heard. "You stole my property. That's a crime." Karen smirked. "Prove it was me. No one saw anything." I stormed off, seething. She was right. I had no proof. But I wasn't about to let this go. I called the police and reported the theft. They took a report, but didn't seem too concerned about a missing sign. Fair enough, they had bigger crimes to deal with. But it lit a fire under me. I decided to fight fire with fire. Or rather, signs with signs. The next day, I went to the hardware store and bought every piece of plywood they had. I got cans of paint in every color imaginable. Then I got to work. I spent the whole weekend making signs. Big signs, small signs, colorful signs. I put up a new, even larger version of my original farm sign. Then I added more. Not an homeowner association member, never will be. Tractors at work. Noise complaints ignored. Honk if you love farms. No Karen zone. I lined my entire property border with these signs, facing the homeowner association neighborhood. As a finishing touch, I strung up some old work lights so the signs would be visible at night. The response was immediate. Karen was at my door bright and early Monday morning, practically foaming at the mouth. "You need to remove those signs immediately," she shrieked. "They're a violation of..." "Of what?" I interrupted. "Your precious homeowner association rules that don't apply to me? Try again, Karen." "I'll call the police," she threatened. I smiled. "Go ahead. While you're at it, you can explain to them what happened to my original sign," she left in a huff. True to her word, the police did show up later that day. But it didn't go how Karen planned. The officer, a good old boy named Jim, took one look at my signs and burst out laughing. "This is what she called us about? Damn, John, I love what you've done with the place." I explained the whole situation, the harassment from the homeowner association, the stolen sign, all of it. Jim got serious real quick. "Tell you what," he said, "let me look into this. Theft is theft, even if it's just a sign." Turns out karma works in mysterious ways. Remember those fancy work lights I put up? Well, they had caught more than just people's attention. They'd caught Karen in the act. My neighbor across the street, the last house before homeowner association territory, had a security camera on his garage. He didn't think much of it until he heard about my stolen sign. When he checked the footage, lo and behold, there was Karen and two of her homeowner association cronies, struggling to carry off my sign in the middle of the night. Jim came back a few days later with a warrant. They found my sign in Karen's garage, freshly painted white as if she was trying to hide the evidence. Karen was arrested for theft. She tried to play it off as a misunderstanding, but the video evidence was pretty damning. In the end, she pled guilty to a misdemeanor, paid a fine, and had to do community service. The icing on the cake? The judge, with a twinkle in his eye, ordered her to repaint my original sign as part of her community service. Under my supervision, of course. You should have seen Karen's face as she stood in my driveway, wearing old overalls, carefully repainting each letter of Miller Family Farm. I supervised from my porch, sipping lemonade and offering helpful tips like, "You missed a spot there, Karen." The homeowner association kept their distance after that. I took down most of my extra signs as a gesture of good faith, but I kept the "not an homeowner association member" one, just as a reminder. These days, things are pretty quiet. I go about my farm work, and the homeowner association folks stick to their side of the fence. Some of them even wave when they drive by now. As for Karen, I heard she moved away a few months later. Apparently, living next to a farm was too stressful for her. Can't say I'm sad to see her go. My old sign is back where it belongs, looking better than ever. Every time I drive past it, I can't help but smile. It's not just a sign anymore. It's a symbol of standing your ground and fighting for what's right, even when the odds seem stacked against you. And let me tell you, that's a lesson worth more than any homeowner association could ever offer. The next one is a petty revenge story. This might not be a really satisfying petty revenge story, but it still gives me a weird sense of satisfaction when I think of it. Last year, I was visiting my hometown for Christmas. I was about to leave the department store. It was already starting to rain, so I began running towards my car in the almost deserted parking lot when I noticed a woman walking only a few feet right in front of me carrying two huge packed plastic bags. Suddenly, one of the bags she was carrying burst open. All of her groceries, canned food, fruits, and whatnot spilled onto the ground. I quickly approached her and said, "Oh, let me help you," as I tried to help her pick everything up from the ground, and then we looked at each other. Surprise, surprise! It was my old boss from a previous job that I had left a few years earlier. She was a horrible human being. Her anger erupted over the most mundane things. She would berate, tell you off, and call you names in front of everybody. We were clearly overworked because she gave some of us more workloads than what we signed up for. Last I heard, she got suspended for a series of acts of gross misconduct after employees had started filing some complaints against her to Human Resources. Glad I left that toxic place. As soon as I saw that it was her, I immediately let go of whatever I had in my hands and started walking towards my car instead. I saw recognition in her eyes as she begged me to help her pick up her groceries. She then started cussing me out. I just laughed in her face and said, "Good luck." The next one is an entitled people's story. My neighbor from a couple of doors down and I had a long-running feud. It all started when his dog came into my backyard and my dog attacked it. I was nearby and able to call my dog off before it got serious, but the other dog had a couple of bite wounds. The neighbor wanted me to pay the vet bill. When he threatened me with a lawsuit, I offered to pay half, even though I owed him nothing. It was his dog that was off the leash and in my yard, after all. He declined the offer, took me to small claims court, and lost. The trial lasted all of 3 minutes when the judge found in my favor. That set in motion him starting to mess with me on a regular basis. My garbage cans would get knocked over every trash day. He would honk his horn and flip me off if he drove by my house. He tried to get my 10-year-old son arrested for riding another neighbor's mini bike. Never called the cops on their kids, just mine. It was all stupid petty crap. But it was a lot of stupid petty crap. And we were growing frustrated and mildly concerned about what he might do. We eventually grew tired of it and filed a restraining order against him. We dropped the legal case against him when we received a letter from his lawyer stating that he would refrain from any sort of contact with any of my family for a period of 2 years. Things settled down at that point, but I was not yet satisfied. I had been staying on the high road through all of this, not responding to any of his shenanigans in any way. I had a desire to get revenge but never acted on it. Then one day, I hatched my plan of evil genius. I was in the hardware store and I noticed some Japanese beetle traps. These traps are just a plastic bag with a scent pack. The beetles are drawn to the scent, fall in the bag, and can't get out. They also sold refill packages of the scent packs only, 4 per package. My neighbor has a very large rose garden in his front lawn. It is his pride and joy. Japanese beetles love roses. So I bought 4 packages of the refill packs. The scent pack is a waxy substance in a shallow plastic cup. I put the packs in the freezer overnight to allow me to pull the wax out easily. The next morning I woke up at 3 a.m. I popped the wax squares out of their cups and put them in a baggie. Then I crept over to my neighbor's house and spread the wax squares in the mulch under his rose garden, covering them from view with a bit of the hardwood mulch. That day was a hot one. By 11 a.m. it was north of 90 degrees F. I figured the wax had probably melted into the dark mulch. Also, by 11 a.m., the Japanese beetles were starting to arrive at my neighbor's roses. I went on a bike ride later in the evening and could see a small swarm of them attacking the roses. My neighbor had not yet noticed what was happening. By noon the next day, there was a freaking cloud of them. There had to be hundreds, if not thousands. My neighbor noticed. That afternoon, I could see him spraying them and spreading 7 powder and waving his arms in the air in frustration. By the 3rd day, there were thousands of beetles, if not tens of thousands. They were everywhere in his front lawn and wreaking havoc on his roses. By the end of the 4th day, there was nothing left of his rose garden, other than a few tattered leaves and the thorny stalk, and that was it. The deed was done, and I was satisfied and laughing quietly to myself, but laughing and laughing. And I never told a soul what I did, not even my wife. This was a few years ago, and his rose garden is fully recovered now, and it will stay beautiful so long as he keeps being a quiet neighbor. Looking back, I realized that what I did was not right. Revenge is not the answer, and it only leads to more problems. I should have found a way to settle the dispute amicably instead of resorting to revenge. However, I also learned that sometimes the best revenge is living well and being happy. My neighbor may have won the battle, but I won the war. My family and I are still living in the same house, enjoying our peaceful life, while my neighbor is still struggling with his roses. I hope that one day he will learn to let go of the past and move on. But until then, I will continue to live my life and enjoy every moment of it. The next one is an entitled people story. It was just another day at the military base, but something was off. I could sense it, even though I couldn't pinpoint what it was. And then, the call came. It was my wife, and she was crying. I was immediately on edge, wondering what could have gone so wrong. She told me that our house had been foreclosed on and sold for a measly $1,350, all because she missed 2 HOA payments. I was in complete disbelief. How could this happen? We had 4 children under the age of 7, and we had poured all our savings into buying that beautiful family home just 4 years ago. I had to act quickly. I put in an emergency request to return home, and before I knew it, I was on a plane back home to sort this mess out. When I got home, my wife was packing up our belongings into boxes, her face streaked with tears. I hugged her tightly and promised her that we would find a way to fix this. I was furious when I read the paperwork that detailed the sale of our home. All of this over just $1,100 in missed payments. How could the HOA do this to us? I immediately began searching for a lawyer to help us, but it wasn't easy. The HOA held all the power in our state, and most lawyers didn't want to touch these cases. But we finally found someone who was willing to help us. The lawyer pointed out that the Service Members Civil Relief Act could protect us, as I was deployed overseas at the time of the sale. We took the HOA to court, and the judge ultimately ruled in our favor. We were ecstatic to get our home back, but the HOA continued to be a thorn in our side. They nitpicked every little thing, making our lives more difficult than they needed to be. And then, one day, we received a shocking update. The HOA had been embezzling funds from its residents, and it had finally been exposed. The HOA was in shambles, and we couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. After everything they put us through, it was gratifying to see them get what was coming to them. And as for us, we continued to live happily in our home, grateful for the protections afforded to us by the Service Members Civil Relief Act. But the story didn't end there. One day we received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from the company that had bought our home for $1,350. They were now being sued for fraud, and they needed our help. It turns out that they had misrepresented the sale to the court, claiming that they had bought the home for $150,000 instead of $1,350. They were now facing a hefty lawsuit, and they needed our testimony to prove that they had indeed bought the home for the lower amount. We were hesitant at first, but our lawyer advised us that it was the right thing to do. We agreed to testify, and when the trial came around, we were there to provide our evidence. The trial was intense, with lawyers shouting and arguing back and forth. But in the end, justice prevailed. The company was found guilty of fraud, and they were ordered to pay us and the HOA restitution for their deceitful actions. It was a satisfying end to the whole ordeal. We had our home back, and we had helped bring justice to those who had tried to take advantage of us. It was a huge relief for us, and we could finally put this nightmare behind us. We were grateful for the support of our lawyer, family, and friends throughout this entire process. As we settled back into our home, we made sure to keep up with our HOA dues to avoid any future issues. We also made a point to spread awareness about the Service Members Civil Relief Act and the protections it provides for military families. Looking back on this experience, it's clear that the HOA's actions were unjust and unacceptable. But through our perseverance and the support of others, we were able to fight back and come out on top. We were proud to have stood up for our rights and to have helped bring justice to those who tried to take advantage of us. As for our family, we were finally able to move on and enjoy our beautiful home once again, grateful for the small things in life that truly matter. The next one is a petty revenge story. So back in June, I left a very toxic workplace of 8 years. I mainly left due to having a breakdown from being overworked. But this one particular person made working there even worse on top of the excessive work. This guy was 1 year younger than me. He was a 30-year-old man, the type of guy that appears to have peaked in secondary school. Very jock-like mentality and childish too. He was part of my team of 4. I was civil with him just because I had to work with him, but he was my workplace bully. Apart from just the general workplace banter, this guy, let's call him Chris, was relentless with his teasing. What would usually be classified as playful always pushed to bullying from him because he never knew when to quit. And if he noticed you were getting stressed or annoyed, he'd use you as a target of his teasing for the rest of the day. He would be super nice to you when it's just the two of you, but as soon as he has an audience, he picks his victim and will tease them constantly in what he would call playful. And if you ever got annoyed and stood up for yourself, he'd say he's only messing and make out like he's the victim. He's that type of person. One specific thing that he absolutely lost any respect I had for him was when I was still working there, some ex-employee wrote a very aggressive and angry review on Glassdoor about the company. Just because this person used a phrase that I use, Chris thought the review was me. As much as I proved that it wasn't me, didn't even have a Glassdoor account at the time. He was relentless with campaigning around the office that I was the one that wrote it. I also believe he told the boss that I was the one that wrote it once I left, and that's why I didn't get any freelance work from them afterward. So after I left my workplace, my old team still has a group WhatsApp that I'm a part of, and we still talk almost every other day on it. After I left, the group chat went a bit quiet. I assumed they made a new one of just them, which is fair, but the chat still kept going occasionally. I unfollowed and unfriended Chris on Facebook and Instagram because I just didn't want to be associated with him anymore. In the middle of the group chat, he broadcasts, "Why did you unfollow and unfriend me on Facebook?" whilst also at mentioning me. He wrote this message at 6:30 a.m. I woke up to this message broadcasted in the group chat. It pissed me off, so I was honest and said that he's a bully, and instead of making a big thing of it, I'd rather just remove him from the equation. I also said that it was immature of him to do this over the group chat and not in private. He didn't say anything, he just left the group chat and blocked me on everything. The group chat pretty much died after that. I was at the time livid. This 30-year-old man set fire to the group chat, saw what I said, and then ran off. I thought it must be a blessing in disguise because I finally got to say what I wanted to him, and I now don't have to acknowledge him again. But I was wrong. Skip to 3 months later, my husband and I were walking through town and stopping off at a pub to get some grub. And lo and behold, I see Chris there with a new girl I hadn't seen before. I was feeling extra confident and decided to approach him. I went up to him and said, "Hey, Chris, long time no see," with a big grin on my face. Chris looked like a deer in headlights with perfect red cheeks. I asked him, "How are things? You doing well?" He replied in a very normal way, clearly not wanting the conversation to continue and looking awkward as duck in front of his new girl. She asked how we knew each other. I generously waited for Chris to say, "We used to work together." So I added, "Yeah, it's quite funny, really. Chris used to be my workplace bully. He's the reason why I struggled financially after I left my old job because he accused me of writing a hostile review of the company, which I proved I didn't do, and lost me a lot of freelance work because of it." He was gobsmacked, with a face redder than a traffic light. The new girl clearly looked confused and uncomfortable. Neither of them responded. I didn't want it to carry on much longer as it wasn't really fair on her, but just to add salt to the wound, I said, "So, is this your new girlfriend, Catherine? Or is this Georgia? What happened with Sarah since someone said you were still with her last week?" All of those are completely true. He gets around. This girl went from confused to angry in the blink of an eye and just stared at Chris. I just said, "Oh, whoops, I really put my foot in my mouth, haven't I? I better go. It was nice seeing you again, Chris," and walked off. My husband, while he felt bad for the girl, which I did too, but to be fair, I might have saved her from inevitably being dumped by him a few weeks later when he gets bored of her, was very proud that I finally got my closure revenge on him. It feels amazing. Like, I feel petty as duck. But it felt good for there to finally be some consequences for this Chris guy being a dick. The next one is an entitled people story. This happened on Friday night, and I've been struggling to put into words just how insane it was. My ex-in-laws and my ex showed up at my job during the biggest event of the year. Every year at my job there is a Christmas-themed party. The dancers dress up as sexy elves, my boss dresses up as Santa, the bartenders dress up as reindeer, and the bouncers dress up as snowmen. The place is beautifully decorated as a winter wonderland with a huge throne for my boss to sit on and custom poles for the dancers to dance around him. It's a huge thing at my job and is always one of the highest grossing nights of the year. It's advertised all over town that people can come, get their pictures taken with us, sit on Santa's lap, and enjoy a fun evening with custom Christmas music made by a DJ. We even have Christmas-themed drinks, guys. And they are so good. I was so excited for it because I started working there this year, so it was my first time being part of this event. I was dancing that evening, so I was dressed up as a sexy elf. I was feeling great. It was pretty late into the evening, around midnight, when this incident took place. I was dancing on stage when out of nowhere I heard the shrieking sound of my ex-Mill crying. I turned around and there they were. Ex-Mill, ex-Phil, and Bill. Ex-Mill was slapping at Bill's arm and pointing at me. I couldn't make out what she was saying over the music. All I could hear was the shrill sound of her voice. I started looking around for Kyle, my boyfriend. I couldn't see him, but I did see other bouncers, so I waved at them, trying to get their attention. We have a special wave that when a bouncer sees it, they know to come running. Bill comes to the stage and starts shouting at me while the men around him were waving cash at me. He tells me to come down and to come with him, that I was bringing shame to his family. I ignored him. I saw a couple of bouncers heading for us, so I kept dancing, believing I was saved. That was the protocol. Call the bouncer and keep working to avoid making a scene. It was then I felt someone grab my ankle and pull. In my panic, I fell and let out a scream. I looked up and it was Bill. He had pulled himself onto the stage and grabbed me. I started kicking at him with my other foot until the bouncers finally got there and pulled him away from me. I felt someone else grab me and I screamed again, but when I looked up, I saw it was Kyle. Bill and my ex-in-laws were taken into the office while I was taken backstage to ride out the panic attack. Kyle held me until I calmed down. The police were called, and I got to watch as Bill was forced into the back of a police cruiser in handcuffs. He's being charged with public disturbance, assault, and trespassing. My boss was talking to my ex-in-laws, telling them not to come back and warned them the police would be called if they did. Despite how pissed he was, my boss was pretty calm and polite. I then heard ex-Mill shouting about how she was going to take me to court to take my children away from me because a godless whore like me wasn't fit to be a mother. I couldn't take hearing that, and I rushed at her. Kyle had to grab me and stop me, but I was screaming at her that she was a psychopath and would never get her hands on my kids again, that she had raised a lying, cheating, emotionally abusive scumbag. She raised a hand to slap me, but the bouncers and police got between us. She and ex-Phil got into their car and drove off after being threatened with arrest. After calm had been restored, we all went back inside and resumed the party. I made good money that night. Even Samantha, my job's entitled gossip, couldn't deny what Bill and my ex-in-laws did was crazy. Over the weekend, I got a call from someone claiming to be Bill's ex-girlfriend, the one he cheated on me with. I asked her how she got my number, and she said she had her ways. She said she decided to call me after Bill called her begging to get bailed out. She told me that during their relationship, ex-Mill treated her like crap and compared me and her a lot and always acted like she wasn't good enough. She was relieved when they went to Greece, believing her and Bill's relationship could be salvaged at that point. But she was wrong. Bill would also talk about me a lot, and she was always crying about being compared to his ex. When I got the job at the club, his behavior became more erratic. She told me that she confronted him after he was thrown out of the club because word travels fast, and she heard about the whole thing. He got pissed and slapped her, then threw her out of his house. She got him arrested, and he was fired from his job as a result. I thanked her for the information and promptly told her never to call me again. She asked me why, and I told her that she had no issue cheating with Bill and hurting his wife and kids, and that she was only calling me to get back at him for what he's done to her. I hung up and blocked her. I plan to go file for a restraining order today, but now I am armed with more information that will make the process so much easier and go so much faster. Win for me. Merry Christmas, everyone. The next one is an entitled parent story. My mom and I immigrated to the U.S. in 1997. She met my stepdad through an international dating service. My life in America was never hard, so to speak. My mom always told my sister and me that times were tough while growing up. But as a kid, I never knew what it meant. My childhood was filled with the word no. As a kid, you're going to want toys and to go do things with friends. My mom always said no, and if I asked my stepdad, all he would say was, "Go ask your mama," which always led to a no. Now I'll say this, I was never starved. I was given what I needed growing up, but it was always bottom of the barrel. I remember asking my mom for a pair of Nikes once, and I mean once. They were $65.99, and my mom looked at me and said, "You're so greedy. You are so ungrateful for what you have. Your family back home could never afford nice shoes like that. Don't ever ask me for shoes like that again." Until I got my first job, I wore Walmart and Kmart clothes. My mom drilled into my head that me asking for things that any kid would ask for was wrong. The family back home had it so bad that I would be doing them an injustice for having clothes or toys or video games when they couldn't. A side note that is important. When I came to America initially, my mom and stepdad did not want me to start school a year late, so I brain dumped Spanish and learned English. It was not until last year, 2022, that I really started taking the initiative to learn Spanish. Another side note about my parents. They have separate bank accounts. My stepdad claims that his money is his and my mom's money is hers. This will become relevant. Also, my mom would never pay for a ticket for me to visit our home country because she said it was too expensive, and I didn't speak Spanish anyway. I got to the point where I was very fluent in conversational Spanish. My original plan was to surprise my mom. I practiced by getting in touch with family members back in our home country. I was talking to one of my cousins, and I asked her how her day was. She said it was okay, but she was waiting for the wire from my mom. At first, I thought that was some sort of slang that I was not familiar with, so I asked her to clarify what she meant. She then told me that she was waiting for my mom to send $800 down to them, and they were waiting at a Western Union for her MoneyGram to come in. At first, I was thinking something was wrong, so I offered to help. My cousin said no, and when I asked again if something was wrong, my cousin said no. Then I asked how long my mom had been sending money. She said since 1999. I asked her if it was always $800, and my cousin explained that every month was a little different, but it's always been around $600 a month. I said all right and called my mom. I told her that our cousin told me about the money she'd been sending down there every month since 1999. She said, "Yeah, it's for your grandmother's medicines." I called her out. "No, it's not. You send them money because you feel guilty about living in America and they can't. So you send them money every month, and they spend it on the same things you have told me I wasn't allowed to have because I was GREED. I told her that during that conversation, I asked my cousin what type of clothes and shoes they wear. They said all the name brands that I was never allowed to look at. They took vacations on my mom's dime to Brazil, Peru, and Puerto Rico, while I missed every single school field trip that required money. I got a job at 14 so I could help with groceries and buy my own clothes because I felt that I was costing my mom too much money. I explained that according to them, she would send at least $600 a month down there. That would mean she has sent over $170K. I told her she could have helped me and my sister get through college, but instead, we had to take the student loan route. I asked her this question. Is the reason you never bought me and my sister tickets to go visit because you didn't want us to see the truth? Her reply, I brought you to America. You had it better than all of them. You're just ungrateful. I said, no, I just don't feel guilty about being here. If they really wanted to come here, they should have used the $170K you sent them. If you have made it this far, you might be wondering where my stepdad is in all this. His belief is, if the conversation is about money that is not his, then it's not his problem. It was never about the clothes or the shoes. I just felt so betrayed because I wanted to experience what other kids around me experienced, not everything, but some things. As a kid, I was made to feel terrible for wanting anything because I supposedly had it better. I handed my mom my paychecks for years thinking times were just too tough, just to find out that I had nothing to feel guilty about. I feel like my childhood was taken away from me because I wanted all the things a normal kid asked for. The next one is an entitled people's story. This happened when my wife and I first got married. My grandfather had passed just a couple months before and left me a very sizable inheritance with a note to make sure I use it smartly to start a good life for my wife and I. My father-in-law downs a real estate company that buys foreclosed houses and rehabs them, and he knew of a great starter home for my wife and I, and agreed to pay to have it rehabbed with the understanding that we would pay him back when we were better established, or after 2 years when we sold the house. So we bought the house, and it took about 90 days to rehab it before we moved in. This is an important fact later on. So we finally move into our house, and had been there about 2 weeks when someone came and knocked on our door stating that they were the Homeowners Association, HOA president, and asked for my landlord's contact information. I explained that we didn't rent the home and that we were the owners, and then they followed that up by asking to speak with my parents. I reiterated again that I was the homeowner and asked them what they wanted. They explained that there was a HOA for the neighborhood, and that I needed to sign the HOA rules and that I owed $90 prorated for my dues, but that they would give me 30 days to pay as a courtesy. However, they needed me to sign the rules right then. I told them I wanted to read and review them first before I agreed to sign anything, and they were extremely pushy about signing them right then. I refused, and they told me that I had 7 days to sign them and explained that they have legal power to fine me if I do not turn in a signed copy in that time. I called my in-laws because I didn't know anything about HOAs and asked them for their advice. My father-in-law got pissed, saying that it should have been disclosed prior to the sale, but sometimes with HUD houses that gets missed. We agreed that the $30 month fee wasn't horrible, especially because they did provide a really nice playground for the neighborhood. So I agreed and signed the rules. There were a couple that seemed a little over the top to me, but I agreed anyway because from my understanding at the time I really didn't have any choice. It seemed fine enough until about a month passed and we had a small house warming party with a couple friends. Literally, there were less than 8 people there, including my wife and I. The house was small, but it had a nice deck, so we were out back having a small fire using a fire pit one of our friends had just given us, when I heard someone knocking at the door. No, pounding like a freaking cop. I just went around the house and there was the HOA president, his car in front of my house with a yellow police light on top. Yes, I'm serious. I asked him how I could help him and he very sternly told me that I was in violation of the HOA rules by throwing a party outside of approved hours, 10 p.m. curfew, and that I needed to send my friends home or quietly take it inside. I checked my watch and it was 10:05 p.m. I was amazed, but we took it inside regardless. The very next day, I had a letter from the HOA stating that it was my official warning for violation of the HOA rules by throwing a, and I quote, wild bonfire that was a safety hazard while drinking. I literally hadn't drank at all. Whatever. I brush it off and figured it was no big deal. Flash forward 9 months. We were hosting a teen group devotional for our church one afternoon, and we were playing a game of football in the street. We lived on a connecting street that got virtually no traffic, and only had 2 houses on it, ours and the family across from us, whose kids were also playing in the game. All of a sudden I hear a police siren and see the yellow light flashing. HOA president gets out and tells us that we have to break it up immediately as it's a safety hazard because one of the kids could run over. I was fed up with him and told him that they were fine and that we've been watching for cars and that he was literally the first car we've seen and we had been playing for over an hour at that point. He insists and asks what would happen if an ambulance or police officer needed to come down that street to save someone's life. This was stupid because literally both streets we were connected to have entrances from the main road. I gave in and we went inside. Next day, I get a letter explaining that I was being fined $60, the maximum fine allowed for a first offense, and that if I wanted to protest it, I could attend the next HOA meeting. I decide that I want to protest the fine, but noticed that the fine was due in 30 days, and the next HOA meeting wasn't for 35 days. I opted not to pay until after the hearing, and wrote a letter back to the HOA president stating as such. I go to the meeting and it's literally myself. The HOA president, the HOA secretary, president's wife, vice president, president's neighbor, and treasurer, vice president's wife. My protest was immediately overruled, and I was also charged a $30 late fee for not paying on time despite notifying him. I was fed up, I couldn't take it any longer, but realized I really didn't have any recourse. About 5 months later, we gave birth to our first child, and about a month after that I was driving home one night. I was working a second job in retail at the time, and my buddy in the military called me. He had been deployed when my daughter was born and was calling to congratulate me. When I got home, I didn't want to risk waking up my sleeping newborn daughter, so I just sat in my car with the engine running as it was a little chilly outside. I sat there for about half an hour when I heard the police siren and saw the yellow lights. Now keep in mind, police sirens aren't quiet, and this was right in front of my house. His stupid yellow light was flashing everywhere, including into my daughter's bedroom. I got out of the car and rather rudely told him to turn off the light as to not wake my daughter. He explained that I looked suspicious sitting in my car with it running outside of my house. I explained the situation and he told me I had to go inside and that my history of being a troublemaker wouldn't grant me any leniency. I basically told him where I thought he could go and proceeded to sit on the hood of my car. He sat there for another 15 minutes telling me I needed to go in and at one point touched my shoulder. I explained to him that if he touched me again, I would take it as a sign of aggression and defend myself, which he responded by getting in his car and leaving. He circled the block about 4 times the next 30 minutes, which was when I got too cold to stay out and finally went inside. Next day, I get a hand-delivered letter from him and the vice president, and he also asks me to step outside to talk about last night's incident. He explains that he was being nice by not calling the police on me after I threatened him, at which point I cut him off and told him that he needed to get off my property before I called the police on him for trespassing. I read the letter and saw that he was giving me 2 different fines for $180 each, which were the maximum amounts. One for violating curfew, and one for disobeying the night watchman. I was done. I had reached my breaking point. This is where the revenge comes in. I start looking into HOA laws and regulations regarding fines and how to protest them because I felt like this was clearly abuse. I find that the law states that you must be notified of an HOA 10 days prior to closing on a house and must be served with the HOA rules within 45 days of purchase, or you are not subject to being forced to participate in the HOA. I remember that we weren't served until after we moved in, which was close to 90 days after we closed. So I called my real estate agent, who is a very close family friend. My in-laws have bought literally thousands of houses from her over the past 35 years, and asked if she had the paperwork still, and she said she can get me a copy. I looked, and it was over 90 days after purchase that we were notified, and there was no disclosure statement at closing. Relator says she must have misplaced it because it's required by law to be provided prior to the sale, and basically that she wouldn't miss something like that because it comes to her when they do a title inspect on the house whether or not there is a registered HOA. She does a little digging and calls me back 2 days later and says that my neighborhood doesn't have an HOA registered with the city or county, which is required. I end up calling the county office in charge of registering and give them the neighborhood name, and she says that our neighborhood is registered in the other city and not in our city, and that if we wanted to start an HOA, we would have to follow these certain steps, and that without those, the HOA wouldn't be allowed to collect any money or have any authority. Apparently, what had happened was our neighborhood was originally all in one city, but when the city lines changes, the neighborhood was split in half. The other neighborhood kept the HOA that was registered, and our HOA president was supposed to register with the state, but didn't feel like jumping through all of the hoops that it required. I was ready to walk down to the president's house and rip into him, but decided to be smart for a minute. I talked to my neighbor across the street, who also hated the HOA, and told him what I found out. He was furious about it as well. We talked to a few more and get a group of about 10 of us together that agree we need to show up at the next HOA meeting. Word had apparently spread because there ended up being more people than the library meeting room could host. I had specifically asked to be the speaker for the group, which they were nice enough to let me do. The president tried to prevent me from speaking due to being overdue on my fines. At this point, I'm about 3 weeks late on my last set of fines with a $30/week penalty on each fine, so my current bill is set to about $540, but I spoke anyway. I explained to them that I had contacted my in-laws attorney, also a family friend, who had drafted together a lawsuit regarding the fact they were impersonating a registered HOA in order to collect money from us, which was fraud. The president dismissed me and said I had no idea what I was talking about, and that he had enough of my antics. The staff members all left immediately while the rest of us stayed and talked. A month later, we served them formally, myself and 20 other homeowners, suing them for all fines and HOA dues we had paid, to the tune of approximately $50,000 as some of these families had been there over 10 years. The president and vice president got their own attorney who attempted to legitimatize the HOA, but it required the signature of like 90% of the homeowners. They got 3 signatures, including the 2 of themselves. Some other old bitter hag signed. After that failed, they tried to settle by agreeing to abolish the HOA and showed that they hadn't financially gained from it and that all funds had been used for the park upkeep, snow removal, and other neighborhood events. We took a vote and this was turned down in overwhelming fashion. I was surprised I actually voted to accept this. Then about a week later, one of the other families calls and mentions something about the park maintenance and snow removal. Apparently, he had given a quote to do the landscaping for the park, cutting the grass, mulching, etc., and his quote had been a couple $100 cheaper than what they were paying, and that it had always bothered him because the person that did those jobs was the vice president's son, and that what they were paying him was pretty outrageous in terms of what's standard. Eventually, it went to court, where the judge looked at everything and mandated that they pay $21,000, $1,000 per homeowner, plus attorney and court fees, which were like another $2,000 for a total of $23,000 in damages. Additionally, they were fined by the city's governing body after it was reported. I don't know how much that fine was, though. We ended up selling the house that following summer, but I talked to a couple friends that still lived there about a year after it, and they said that the president and vice president both sold their houses and moved away because they were pretty much hated by everyone in the neighborhood, and that they had an informal HOA that people donated to for upkeep of the park. The next one is an entitled people story. As an immigrant from South Korea, it's not always easy to fit in with the locals, especially when it comes to finding the perfect spot for my favorite pastime fishing. However, after years of living in the United States, I've learned how to navigate these situations and find the perfect spot for myself and my son, Hyun. One Sunday morning, as we were packing up our fishing gear, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement in the air. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, and the waves were calm and inviting. It was the perfect day for fishing. As we walked down the beach, we noticed a woman setting up her beach chair in the exact spot where we usually fish. I tried to ignore her, thinking that she would eventually move, but as we started to set up our gear, she approached us. "Excuse me, this is my spot," she said with a stern look on her face. "You'll have to find somewhere else to fish." I was taken aback by her audacity. This was a public beach, and we had just as much right to fish there as she did. I tried to reason with her, but she was not interested in listening. She kept repeating that this was her spot and that we needed to move. I could see that Hyun was getting upset, so I decided to pack up our gear and move down the beach. As we walked away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anger and frustration. This woman had no right to bully us and make us feel unwelcome in a public space. As we started fishing in our new spot, I noticed the woman had called the police. I could hear her yelling into her phone, claiming that we were trespassing on her property and stealing her fish. I was incredulous. How could someone be so entitled and ignorant? Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived on the scene. The woman started to cry and told the officers that we had been harassing her and stealing her fish. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I explained to the officers that we were simply fishing in a public space and that we had not done anything wrong. I showed them the fish we had caught and told them that we were not interested in causing any trouble. The officers seemed to understand our situation and asked the woman to leave us alone. However, as we were packing up our gear to leave, the woman approached us again. This time she was more aggressive and started to push Hyun. I could feel my blood boiling, and I knew that I had to do something to protect my son. I called out for help, and thankfully a group of beachgoers came to our aid. They stood up to the woman and asked her to leave us alone. She eventually backed off and left the beach, but the incident left me feeling shaken and angry. Update: after the incident, I decided to file a complaint with the local authorities. I wanted to make sure that this woman would never be able to harass another family again. I also started a petition to raise awareness about the importance of respecting public spaces and treating everyone with kindness and respect. Thankfully, the local community rallied behind us, and the petition gained a lot of traction. The woman was eventually banned from the beach, and we were able to fish in peace without any more incidents. However, this experience taught me a valuable lesson about standing up for myself and my family. No one should ever feel unwelcome or harassed in a public space, and it's up to all of us to make sure that everyone feels safe and welcome in these spaces. I also learned the power of community and how standing together can create real change. In the months following the incident, I made it a point to get more involved in my local community. I attended town hall meetings, volunteered for local charities, and started participating in community events. Through these experiences, I met so many incredible people and found a sense of belonging that I had never felt before. Hyun also benefited from these experiences. He became more confident and outgoing, and he made many new friends. I could see how much he had grown since the incident on the beach, and it filled me with pride. However, our newfound sense of security was short-lived. One day, as I was walking home from the grocery store, I noticed the same woman who had harassed us on the beach. She was walking towards me, and I could see the anger in her eyes. "Hey, you!" she yelled as she approached me. "You got me banned from the beach, and now I can't even swim. Do you know how much that means to me?" I tried to walk away, but she grabbed my arm and pulled me back. I could feel her nails digging into my skin, and I knew that I was in trouble. I tried to call out for help, but she covered my mouth and told me to be quiet. As she continued to hold me captive, I could feel my fear turning into anger. How could someone be so entitled and cruel? I knew that I had to fight back and show her that I was not afraid. I kicked her in the stomach and broke free from her grasp. I ran as fast as I could to the nearest police station and reported the incident. The officers took my statement and promised to investigate the matter. In the weeks that followed, I struggled with anxiety and fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that she would come after me again, and I was constantly looking over my shoulder. However, with the support of my community and the local authorities, I was eventually able to overcome my fear and move on. Today, I continue to fish on the beach with Hyun, and we feel safe and welcome. The incident with Karen taught us a valuable lesson about the importance of standing up for ourselves and others, and we will never forget the power of community and resilience. The next one is a petty revenge story. This happened a couple of years ago when I was about 13 or 14. I'm 16 now. But I just thought about it. I used to have a piggy bank that counted the change as I put the coins in there. And I remember I had around $60 worth of change in the bank, and I had left it on my dresser once because my mom was going to take me to Walmart to trade it for cash after school. When I came back from school, the bank was gone, and I asked my mom about it, and she told me my stepdad cashed it out himself, and that he would give me the cash back, and I was like, okay. About 2 weeks went by, and I never got the cash back, so I started asking about it. And my mom said he kept the cash because it made up for all the haircuts and gifts he had gotten me. So one day, when he came home from work, we were going to have a BBQ anyway, so he was outside and he had his wallet and phone on the table outside. He carries a lot of cash, so I waited for him to go back inside, and I took $200 from his wallet and went back inside to my room, and I hid it in my sock drawer. I remember him asking me and my mom what happened to the money, and my mom didn't believe that I would steal from him, so she just said that the wind probably blew it away because his wallet was outside. My middle school was right beside a shopping center that had Starbucks, Chick-fil-A, and Wendy's, so every day when the bus would drop me off, I would go to any of those places for breakfast until my $200 ran out. The next one is an entitled People story. I, 27F, have a cousin, 26F, with whom I had a remarkably close relationship. We were like sisters. However, she was responsible for incidents that made me reconsider our relationship. In 2012, when I was 16, she gave me a strong relaxer that caused me to cut off 14 inches of hair. For context, I used to relax my hair, and it was always soft or regular since I have fine hair. She did this because she started dating my ex, who would not stop talking about my hair or my natural beauty. She stole my friends and possible boyfriends, turned family members against me, rubbed in my face that she was my grandmother's favorite, made fun of me for going back to my curly hair, mocked me for losing my older brother, slept with my ex while on the process of moving together, made a post on Facebook mocking me for giving birth to my dead baby while 7 months pregnant, left threatening notes and a voodoo doll on my car. I can keep going, but I do not want to make this any longer by explaining how messed up she is. I tried to get a restraining order against her, but the police thought I did not have enough evidence. I had texts of her admitting to doing it, but it was not enough, or as one police officer told me, it could be faked. So I blocked her from all my social media and blocked her number. The only times I would see her were at family gatherings, but I would avoid her since I did not want her situation in my life, or avoid her not to have my mental health triggered by her. In June, she got engaged to my ex, 33M, and I found out from family members. My aunt was celebrating her anniversary with a BBQ, and I knew I would see her. I was having an enjoyable time, but when one of my aunts asked her how the wedding planning was going, she couldn't help but brag that it was good, and now she had an announcement. She looked at me with a devilish smile and asked me in front of everyone if I wanted to be her maid of honor, since thanks to me they both met. I was cold and told her no. She whined about why not, and all I gave her was a look. She said that it was time for me to put effort into fixing our sister-cousin relationship. I laughed and told her that by the time she was having her wedding, I would be in college finals and after that, on a month-long trip for my anniversary. I said it was better than seeing two clowns getting married. I also told her the reasons I said no, plus the little spoiled girl wants a Christmas wedding. She started crying and yelled that if I didn't do this, I was not invited to the wedding. I looked at her and said, "Fine by me," and walked away, leaving her with a surprised Pikachu face. I have not spoken to her since that day, but all my family members support me since they all saw how much of a horrible person she is. The next one is an entitled parent story. My EF called a couple of days ago and demanded that my daughter's name have my maiden name. For context, I am ethnically Filipino, but a second-generation immigrant, as I immigrated when I was 6 years old. Filipino tradition is such that the child's middle name must be the mother's maiden name. For example, my mother's maiden name is Smith, fake. Therefore, my middle name is Smith. My daughter had just graduated from high school, and my parents received a picture of her diploma. When they looked at the photo, they realized it did not have their last name, my maiden name, on it. They were very upset. Given that my husband and I are culturally American but ethnically Filipino, my husband is half, we decided to give her a new name for her middle name and have her hold her father's last name. I was also forced to have a hyphenated last name. Even though I wanted my husband's last name, I conceded on having both names since my parents paid for my education. It's hell to deal with even to this day. EF complained and demanded that I change her name. I told them we are Americans and live in America, including my parents. Therefore, we will use what is culturally appropriate. He told me he does not care about the American way and that I am turning my back on the right, Filipino way. My daughter is already 18 years old. I can't legally do anything regarding her name anymore. I had told him that, but he yelled and demanded I must get it done, not my daughter, me, and I better, or else. Personally, I have a myriad of reasons why I don't want my daughter to have my maiden name. A lot of issues such as FAFSA, schooling, and even inheritance could also be on the line if she were to change her name. Plus, she just doesn't want a different name. My daughter said no, and both my husband and I agree with her. Later that night, she called them and told them, very nicely, that she will in no way change her name. The only reason she would is if she gets married in the future. EF threw a fit on the phone and she ignored him and hung up. They haven't spoken to me since. I want to talk to my parents again, but if they're going to throw a fit over a name and continuously be upset, especially over a name they knew about for 18 years, then I will cut ties. I hope they get their act together. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.